live.
All right, welcome everybody to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We are here today with the Department of Public Service to learn about their Connectivity Division Annual Report. So we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves and then turn it over to you. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Templeton, section, right?
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southwood, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klubner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Who do we have in the room?
Dana Lee Perry, Rasmus.
Great. All righty. Hunter, for the record, over to you.
Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications for the Public Service Department. Thank you for inviting me in. It's my understanding I'm here to testify on the highlights, summary, and end recommendations of the telecom annual report.
That is correct. And we, I believe, have your annual report.
Yes, yep. And thank you, Alex, for printing that out. Appreciate it.
Great.
So I'll start with the
Where is the image up there of this?
Oh, we might need to. Hey, Alex, do we need to be concerned that there's no picture of us up there? One second.
You want me to reboot this thing?
You know how to do that?
I think you just press it down and then
Okay.
press it up.
Yeah, I got it.
Is it the left actor and blue?
I think that goes.
I know. I
Yes.
don't know what is going on right now.
Do it.
We'll try that.
Okay.
It's sensitive.
It didn't say much. There we go.
Now, Tom.
Oh,
I recently heard about there.
work 19.
They think that have reboot.
Well, now it's Lincoln.
There.
There we go.
all right.
Which button is scrolling through the images?
The different view. There we go.
It's still about that standard here.
You got rich, so, you know, prime view. So
Right.
Yeah.
that's what-
Oh, interesting. Oh, look,
It goes over and all of those to the
for
speaker.
whoever's speaking.
Yes.
Screen.
I don't think it's a good view, but
That's what says mode. Try pressing mode.
Yeah, that's working. There we go. All right.
All right. Back at it. Hunter, sorry about that.
How many legislators does it take to fix a camera?
Again, Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications for the Public Service Department. So I'll start off with a summary of the division, the telecom division and public service. There is 3.5 of us total. It's currently 2.5. We have one position that we are recruiting for. That includes myself, the telecom director, my telecom project manager, who does most of the 248A reviews, as well as the commercial mobile radio service petitions and runs the projects at the department, like the drive test. The connectivity coordinator, who does outreach, it would have been the one who would make a nice PowerPoint for this testimony. We're currently recruiting, looking to make an offer and get that position back on board. And our telecom infrastructure specialist, which is the half, they're part-time person. They turn the data that we collect into consumables like the mobile drive test map, the broadband map, the 248 tower map. And they currently, as of last year, handled the mobile, handled the broadband maximum speed map in totality. So one of the things that we do within the division is we handle the VUSF, the Vermont Universal Service Fund. Telecom Division manages this, provides funding for the Vermont Telecommunications Relay Service and associated equipment distribution program. We also provide administrative services for the Vermont Telecommunication Relay Service Advisory Council, or VTRS. It's easier to abbreviate the service over and over. The VTRS program provides functionality equivalent telephone service to Vermonters and Vermont's deaf, blind, and hard of hearing communities. since, was that July 1st, 2026, the USF Universal Service Fund has been funded via the new mechanism passed in Act 145 in 2024. This change was a switch to a per line charge for voice over IP and postpaid wireless, as well as traditional landline service. It was projected to result in the ability to fully fund 911, fully fund 988, and to have a little left over for the Universal Service Fund to build a nest egg. As some of the filers who contribute to this fund are quarterly and some are biannually, we have so far only seen 2 cycles of funding, and we're unsure if the change will have the desired impact. We'll have a fuller view into the performance of the fund at the end of the fiscal year. The next big thing we do within the division is 248A petitions. The numbers, we did 174 last year. They might be slightly different than the PUC depending on when we pulled the numbers before or after a certain date, if more or less coming at that point. I know some percents have been tossed around, at least as far as the things that we did. When I punched the numbers, they were 85% de minimis, 4% limited size in schools, and 11% full new towers. For reference, in 2024, we did 82 to 48A petitions. Of those, 70% were de minimis, 18% were limited size in scope, and the same 11% were full.
Hunter, can you remind me of the, sorry, we've taken so much testimony. Can you remind me of the role the department plays in the 248A process?
Yeah,
When you say we did,
so the department does more than the telecom division. It also works with the public advocacy division, which does a legal back and forth with the PUC in that process. But as far as telecom goes, we review every one of these petitions that comes to the PUC.
that's right.
It gets sent to us. We read it. We go through the technical specs. We go through the site plans. Let's see. We validate provider numbers. For instance, we have an internal spreadsheet where we calculate the visible area of the antennas versus what they say versus what their site plan says and make sure everything matches up. Sometimes you find discrepancies. For instance, we had a plan that showed 4 antennas on the site plan. The narrative showed 3. So we reach back out to the tower builder and we say, hey, something doesn't add up. Say you're going to do 4 antennas here. Say you're going to do 3 here. Can you provide some clarity? Case actually, we have a structural report. Each one of these tower modifications comes with a structural report from an engineer that says whether or not it's going to pass. 99.9% of them pass. We had one that actually said it was going to fail. We had 2 that said it was going to fail. So we reached back out and said, you guys submitted a plan for some modifications that don't pass the structural report. What's going on? They got back to us and said, you're right. We forgot to submit the changes that we were going to do to the tower. So it does pass, as well as the amended structural report. So they submit those. So we do a technical review of every 248A petition that comes in. We calculate disturbed surface area based on the site plans. If it says it's going to be 100 feet by 100 feet, we do the math and say, okay, it matches up to what the narrative says. That's the type of review you do for the 248 petitions.
And that's delivered to the PUC as part of its body of evidence.
Yeah.
Or something. Okay.
We also look at propagation maps and existing tower locations and compare those. For co-location reports in our tower database, where appropriate, we make note of potential co-location sites and ask for more clarification on why they may or may not be suitable. So if someone suggests a tower within 10 feet of another tower, we'll say, hey, we have a record that you already have a tower here. What's going on? Why can't you co-locate? 10 feet is a wildly inaccurate number, but we oftentimes ask why the co-location is not possible. The piece I have in here is I just want to make sure folks know that this isn't a rubber stamp process. We actually read each and every one of these, and the telecom project manager and myself go through all of these to make sure they are what they say they are.
Rep. Kleppner.
And your technical review process that you pass on to the PUC is separate, different group that does the advocacy in front of the PUC for the public interest?
I believe that is a public advocacy group, yeah. We do the technical review, we give our results to the public advocacy group, and that helps drive their stance.
Thank you.
So one thing that's worth mentioning is that we often hear from citizens who want increased cell service in their location. I know that's probably not something you guys necessarily hear in committee, but we get calls from citizens and municipalities who are asking how we can assist in getting service in their town. I'll give another example in a minute further down, but this fall we received a number of calls from Shelburne regarding Verizon service, spotty Verizon service on Loop 7. We investigated, we looked at the tower map to see where the towers were. We reached out to Verizon, network engineering, and we said, is there anything wonky going on in that direction? Something needs to change. Can you confirm all your towers are working? They confirmed it. We further went through and got back hold of the town of Shelburne and said, this is where the infrastructure is. This is how far it propagates. And really, if you're looking to expand access along that corridor, or if you break the town off Route 7, you're going to need larger macro infrastructure or some other infrastructure to support that. So we do look at that and work with folks when that stuff comes up.
Just a reminder that we did ask DT and Verizon, think that it's accurate updated mapping. I don't think Steve has yet. Did we get those?
Okay. Yeah. Did they confirm that they would provide that to us? Because I think they consider that competitive information.
I consider it an
Towers.
affirmation.
Coverage area or the towers?
No, the coverage area. So they were gonna,
Yeah, we don't get that.
okay. I do have a second question.
Yeah.
It seems like a bunch of the towers that were not even for cell service, they were the two-way radios. Can you remind me who utilizes that service?
Those are business to business services, so they're used by, I don't have specific examples for that provider, but that type of service in general is used for maybe delivery companies, construction companies back and forth, the buses. I believe that the transit system uses push to talk two-way radio service as opposed to cellular mobile service, as well as the public safety network, but that resides on that's a different thing, but that's another example of a push to talk business to business service.
But that's not, so
That's
that's
not
separate.
right.
Yeah.
That wasn't with the contested towers.
So I want to just make sure I'm understanding. That was an important question, I think. So the two of the contested towers we've been hearing about recently, in Tinmouth and Willoughby, I think are the two. They were two-way radio towers, but that is not a public safety use. That could be UPS wanting to have a relay for its drivers.
It's my understanding that the service that company offers is a business to business service and not a public safety service.
Yeah, right.
So that you mean like ITW?
Yes.
But I believe in your testimony that by definition, those are considered in the public good.
There, yep, statute currently considers radio service in the public good.
That's in statute.
Okay.
Another petition that's currently still with the PUC, I can't get into specific details, is while there's pushback on the tower is being proposed in a location where there's currently zero cell service. There's nothing, it's a complete dead zone. It's along a major traffic corridor for commuting. And according to the town's Facebook page and front porch forum discussions, which we went and looked at during the petition, during our review, there's a large amount of support for it. So while I agree, a lot of the pushback and more vocal pushback is not in support of the towers, at least through empirical evidence and investigation. Then we looked at, like I said, the Facebook page for the town and adjoining town, and then the town's front porch forum, the discussion back and forth with residents for cell towers. This is just
Which tower is this? I'm sorry.
this is one that is still in flight, the PUC, so I need to be pretty generic.
All right. Yeah, that's why I didn't.
Yeah.
I think nobody was.
Intentionally vague. This is just to provide the other side of the coin that many people want coverage where they live. I don't have coverage where I live. I live 10 minutes outside of town. I would love to have cell coverage at my house. Last time we had a bad storm, and I lost power. And I was not able to use my cell phone through my internet connection. I had to drive a mile down the road to book a hotel. So I had to stay in a place I had heat at night. But there's another side to this coin, and people do want to see expanded coverage across a lot of the state. So for the statutory stuff we do, we have a responsibility for mapping broadband availability across the state. Our map is a little less useful than others. A fair amount of our data is bound by confidentiality agreements. So while we show the maximum speed at every E911 address we map, we don't show the provider who provides that speed and service. That's due to the fact that in order to get this data, we have to sign an agreement that says we won't share it. The results are reported on the department website as well as in the department's handbook APIs and used by Hedi to identify competitive municipalities, which can be noted in the incentive rate plan. So that data is directly used by Hedi to figure out which municipalities have over 95% penetration for a fiber. This project is a fair amount of work. We are increasingly getting less responses to our outreach, and the data we get back is increasingly less useful. Last year, our total response rate was slightly under 50%. Only 42% of the people that we asked for data actually responded. So even though that number was low, it does skew because the responses we did get represented 82% of the total data we received. So that means that in that case, 18% of the data on this year's map was carried forward from last year because no one responded when we reached out. There's a cable company in Northfield that I think is currently in the process of being bought out by Charter. So we get instances like that where we reach out and say, can you send us your route maps? Can you send us where you offer service? And we hear crickets. Our general process, you can reach out 3 times over the course of about a month and a half to 2 months, and that's 3 times. And after 3 times, we default back to the last viable data set they gave us. Another issue with this is the format that we get the data is becoming increasingly less useful. For instance, some of the larger cable companies used to send us actual cable routes or address lists, and now we're just getting the federal fabric IDs. So the federal broadband map, just give you what we have, a federal fabric ID. The federal broadband map offers a very similar product as to the one we do, and each location on that includes a fabric ID. So we're getting some of the larger companies just sending us this federal fabric ID, which we then need to go in and reverse engineer into the actual address to put on our map. Our data person works with both the VCBB and the vendor of the VCBB and uses the federal broadband map more than we do, but it's still a fair amount of work for that to happen. All that said, the state has made huge strides in fiber deployment. This is in the annual report. In 2024, we barely broke the 50% mark for homes with fiber to the premises. In 2025, we are at 72.6%, which is, that's a big jump year. So that's the summary. I'll move into the more fun stuff, which is some highlights. At least 2 of them. 2 of the larger highlights are the completion of the updated 248 tower map and the 2024-2025 mobile drive test project. So for the 248A map, I think someone had mentioned it in testimony last week. We redid the 248A map and made it current as to about 6 months ago or so. Again, the vacant position, one of their roles is to take all that data from PUC documents and put it in the map. So we still have a little catch up to do. This map allows people to see all the 248A approved towers in the state, as well as provide direct links into the PUC system to let people see the petitions that are attached to the tower. Position which kept this map more up to date. It was vacant, and while we started the process of adding the missing data, we are a little behind. We've also engaged with Act 250 firms, Peterbilt to be specific, and are beginning the conversations with them and with BCGI to find a method other than just a free-form text search in the Act 250 database to pull their tower information so then we can incorporate it into this map. Once we have able to do that successfully, we'll probably rename it from the 248A tower map to the general Vermont Telecommunication Telemap, as it will represent hopefully everything within the state. The other highlight is the mobile drive test. We've talked about that a couple of times. This is my favorite project. I worked with previous public service employee Corey Chase when I was with EDS, and this project is part of what made me apply for this job 3 years. So the department completed the driving portion and the mapping portion of the 2024-2025 mobile drive test. We completely revamped the public map, make it consumable on a mobile phone, on a tablet, on a computer. We revamped the legend, so rather than showing decibels gain or anything like that, we make it more useful to the general public with basically good, better, best, none, good, better, best, so that people can take a look. We collected test results for over 7,000 miles of road across the state. Drove a lot more than that because it takes a while. You have to drive the same route to get to Burlington and to get to St. Albans. So over 7,000 miles of road were tested. We did some analysis of this, and this kind of goes to what we were talking about in 248A, is that since 2022 to 2024, 2025, we only saw an improvement in, I guess, past tests would be a way to put it, of about 7.5%. So each one of these tests represents a hex, and the hex is roughly a kilometer across. So only about 7.5% of those were able to make a call that weren't in 2022. But on the flip side, 77% of those had greater data speeds. So this goes back to the de minimis petitions you're seeing in 248A, where the bulk of the work that's being done by the cellular companies is in equipment upgrades to get faster speeds as opposed to new deployments. The drive test really demonstrates that 7.5% increase in basically additional cell service and a 77% increase in speeds of existing cell service. So one thing we know is, as there's an increase in overall coverage, that we're seeing more of an increase in speeds. The other thing we do that I really enjoy is public engagement, outreach, and advocacy. We've participated in 2 conferences this year. The first was the 2025 Emergency Preparedness Conference in September in Killington. The department presented an interactive display of the 2024-2025 drive test results, history of the project, a presentation on the data collection and mapping methodology, and a general pitch on the importance for citizens and emergency response personnel to have a good understanding of the reach of the cellular network as they respond to emergencies. The second conference we participated in was we were invited to be a presenter at the Northeast ARC Users Conference in Falmouth, Mass. That's the ESRI conference. That's the mapping folks together and talk about cartography and mapping. The department was a presenter, large regional conference with about 400 attendees and only 50 people at the presentation that the department gave. It focused on the mobile drive test. Again, the history, the methodology, the auxiliary tools that we use for our drive route mapping, the test results aggregation and presentation, and then the lessons learned on how we did that project. 2 other things that we did was we worked closely with the town of St. Albans to try to get small cell infrastructure to cover St. Albans Bay. Our push was fairly unsuccessful, to be blunt. We reached out for our contacts. We engaged a local Vermont company that owns its own piece of spectrum to do the work. Those conversations eventually dwindled off with no positive outcome. We engaged one of the big 3 telecom providers who provided what I considered we don't want to do the work quote. There had someone give you a quote on your house that is we don't really want to do this quote. That's kind of what I thought that one was. We're still loosely engaged with them, but there hasn't been an update in a while. One positive outcome of this was one night when I was speaking at the St. Albans Town Select Board, to say that we were waiting for a quote. A lawyer from one of the other big 3 companies was there. I contacted him after and recommended an additional antenna to cover the bay. Used our drive test map and our 248A map to show what we were talking about. It's my understanding that they are added that antenna so that St. Albans Bay now has coverage from at least one of the big 3 cellular providers. So even though the outreach that we did initially didn't result in what we were hoping for, we were able to use our contacts and our data sets to point out the issue and hopefully get it solved. And the next one is called spinach and life alert, and that's just because the person has spinach in their emails, so they're watching. So we had a citizen reach out to us for assistance and information on how telecommunications could assist her mother with aging in place. So this is a big issue for all of us. We discussed the different medically connected devices, which is do things like fall detection. We discussed battery backup options for power outage, redundancy of systems, including having something that works over a wired system as well as something that works over the cellular system. And eventually we were probably within 20 miles of our house when we were doing one of our drive-to streets. We drove over there, we stopped, we met her, we talked to her, we did testing on her back porch, in her kitchen, and in a driveway, was to get measurements, and tell her, offer some evidence-based data of exactly what provider had the strongest signal in her location. I spoke to Life on her behalf a few times to get details about the services they offered, which is why last time I was here, I think I mentioned that I know Life Alert does indeed work with VoIP phones. I spent more than a few hours on the phone with Life Alert going through their options. I believe ultimately her mother decided to move to assisted living, but we did everything we could to ensure that she was aware of the telecom options that were available to her and to all of her doctors if they do look to do things. That's one of my favorite things. I really enjoy the advocacy piece. I enjoy working with people and trying to help. So yeah, helps me sleep at night. So finally, some recommendations was the last piece asked, and I'm happy to answer any other questions about this. I did not go through this and history it because some of it's fairly dry and you guys can read it on your own. So the first and most important recommendation is please change the cadence of the 10-year telecom plan from 3 years to 5 years. So currently the 10-year telecom plan is redone every 3 years, even though it's a 10-year plan. I'll note that in testimony the other day, someone think the cost of the plan was over $1 million. That is not correct. And we spent about $450,000 on the last plan. That's still a sizable amount. It was not $1 million. The reasoning for the longer cadence on the plan is that the fiber to the premises deployments are currently well underway. We're making a lot of progress, as we've seen, with the 50 to 73%. And the deployment timeline is longer than the 3-year cadence of the plan. This leaves the plan to focus on wireless telecommunications, and the last plan, at least, infrastructure resilience. The infrastructure the last time we did commissioned an engineering study, which led to the recommendation of smaller infrastructure across the state to cover the dead zones. And the truth is that changes in wireless technology are currently evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary, right? Currently, we're with 5G on our cell phones. 6G is years away. The spec is still being discussed. They haven't decided exactly what 6G is going to look like. And the direct sell to satellite is currently still mostly an advertising campaign. I know you can see that. I did testing of that. If I drive about 10 minutes from my house, there's a spot that has no inkling of cell service. So during the Christmas week, I drove up there and I did some testing of 911. Like I said, it took about 10 minutes from one of my locations to get enough of a satellite signal to test and to text 911 to say, hey, this is Hunter, I'm testing emergency. So that it might be useful, but it's not something I would currently bet my life on. As far as the resilience piece, Green Mountain Power is doing large scale resilience projects to vary power and communication infrastructure. But again, the timeline for these projects is longer than a 3-year cadence. So we haven't seen the larger scale impacts that this work will have. We'll use the tower sites.
So Hunter, I want to just make sure I understand. So you guys are recommending or requesting that we change the cadence of the 10-year telecom plan from every 3 years to every 5 years. So it gets updated every 5 years, looking at 10. And if I'm boiling down everything you're saying it's because the technology is changing at this point on a longer timeline. And so there aren't enough changes every 3 years to merit the expense and the time, or I'm just trying to boil it all down.
That's perfect. That's how Yes, that's exactly it. Is that the cadence of the technology changes is now longer than 3 years. So we're putting forth suggestions and ideas in the 10-year plan, but those suggestions and ideas will take more than 2 years to have a difference or to notice a difference if they're followed. So
So you're returning to look at impacts too soon, in your
Yes.
opinion?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes, that's exactly.
yeah,
I would just note, personally, that I think there are a lot of changes that need to be made to the statute related to telecom plan. So opening it up just for delaying how often it's produced feels like a wasted opportunity. And I'm not sure that the chair has enough time, like necessary. Visions to that statute.
The second recommendation is please disband the TCAP, the Telecommunications Advisory Board. A lot of that charge has been spread out across BCBB, other places. We've had one meeting since 2022, and that was the result of a lot of outreach by the department to get them to review the 2024 telecom plan. Each year, we send the annual report to the chair, and consistently, for at least the past 4 years, the chair's response has been, please sunset the TCAP. I'd like to see that happen. That's what I got. That's some summary highlights and recommendations.
I have a question. It's the question I emailed you earlier, and I'll forward your response to the committee, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit here. So I'm trying to understand, whether there's any practical nexus between the 248A process and the 10-year telecom plan. So in other words, it's a big plan. There's a lot of pages in it. So I fully admit this question occurred to me and I didn't have time to go look it up. But I was wondering whether the 10-year telecom plan had kind of a state-driven guiding plan for here's how many cell towers we need, here's where they should go, here's the timeline, at which they should be put up. So in other words, a real marching order thing, like here's where we need the towers. And you said it doesn't have that level of granularity, but I wanted to make sure I understood your answer.
That's correct. It does not include that level of granularity. Some of that work is done that the department's involved in. That was actually the meeting yesterday was canceled due to the snowstorm. But with FirstNet, for instance, you're going to go up to the other DPS, the Public Safety and Waterbury, and get together with them and talk about the need for towers and where do we still have dead spots within the state. The previous FirstNet iteration, I believe, I don't remember if it was a board or committee or what exactly it was before my time, was stood up to offer input on where the first round of towers would get put, but that's not included in the 10-year telecom plan. The process is separate.
So right now, is the market driving where the tower applications go? It's the big telecom companies saying, we want a tower there, and we want a tower there, and we want a tower there.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Rep. Sibilia, and then Tori, sorry.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think you have, just put your finger on one of the big problems I think the telecom plan has, which is that it is misunderstood by some to be an implementation plan for telecommunications in the state. And it is not. It is a resource for those types of companies so that they have an understanding of what's here and what our statutes are and where things are. But it is not an implementation plan. And I think you touched the other piece, which is because most of this is market driven. And most of this we are federally preempted from legislating. It shall go here or there.
Rep. Tori?
Yeah, in that vein, I just wanted to follow up on the small cell pilot. So that's an example where you're you have a sense that those small cells could be useful for these dead zones, but there isn't a market appetite.
Yeah,
And so what is your goal then? Like what happens if there's no market?
I think we come up with a different suggestion for the next 10-year telecom plan. I don't think it's appropriate to just repeat ourselves and say we continue to think that small cell infrastructure, we might put that in there, just to say we continue to think small cell infrastructure is a good solution, but if there's no appetite, then we can't force the hand of the developers, so we have to think of another method to expand that self-service up to these dead zones.
Seems like you could in the 248A process have some carrot, like this tower, and then because there's this other dead zone. I don't know. It feels like there should be some way of incentivizing a developer to pick up a dead zone that's near or somehow, you know what I mean? I don't know how that would work, but I feel like we see this in other industries.
The department's proposal to incentivize was financial,
Okay,
to do
to actually have them.
further selection or to help this fund that kind of stuff. And I think St. Albans illustrated really well that we are for kind of stuff working with the big three because they own the networks that this vision that facility connected its phone surface. So there's one smaller Vermont company that has its own piece of bandwidth that we weren't able to come to an agreement with. But other than that, if you want, and even that company had to have agreements with Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile to roam on their network. So at the end of the day, those three own the network and want access to the network.
Mhm.
With that, have a
Budget.
quick, easy answer.
Yeah.
Incentivize them to do that. I was thinking about it since I started looking years ago, but I only found one that they are on minimum too.
To that point, you did hear some testimony about the much smaller, like cans antennas that go up on like utility poles and things like that. Can you explain that technology and what it's good for, what it's not good for? And
So it's the same as the antennas that are at the top of a big tower, just smaller. Less power, less coverage due to the location, but it's the same cell phone antenna technology that you would see on top of a 180-foot guide tower. It's just smaller. Oftentimes there's stuff to be unidirectional as opposed to aimed, so, or omnidirectional rather, as opposed to aims. But the technology is the same, it's just a smaller scope.
so is it viable to, especially in travel ways where we have utility poles, to like the put multiple cans of that go on the travel ways to?
I think so, yeah. I think that's why I put it in that.
No, I'm not talking about the 50-foot tower. I'm talking about the ones that
Right,
just
yeah.
go right on the
Yep.
existing poles.
Yep, that's how Verizon provides coverage at Shelburne, and that was part of the conversation is that if you would like coverage farther off the Route 7 corridor, then there needs to be some macro infrastructure that can extend. Because right now the coverage is provided by a series of antennas on top of utility poles to go between Shelburne and I think South Bronx, like the car dealership locations.
So that is a viable technology and certain.
From a technological aspect, absolutely. I have no idea from a financial or deployment aspect, but yes, technologically it's a viable solution.
And are we getting applications for more of that sort of thing, or not for like?
Not that often, every once in a while. The one who seems to do that the most actually goes through the Active 50 process. She found on there, dug up through Active 50, and that's Verizon, but they seem to be using that more often. T-Mobile often does, but theirs are not necessarily on top of utility poles. A lot of T-Mobile infrastructure seems to be in church steeples. Or hidden on top of buildings, like next door on top of the pavilion is a T-Mobile antenna. So you have T-Mobile service here, it's amazingly fast. So they use other structures to host those antenna arrays.
So we need more churches, is that what you're saying?
At least more steeples.
Thank you. And do you have any insight as to why they choose to go through Act 250 rather than the 248A process?
I do not. I think it's I can only assume. I could make some wild assumptions, but no, I don't have any insight.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we take a 5-minute break since we've got a longer presentation coming up next. And Alex, we can go off live.